Hey guys, I'm back again and I'm here to do my March wrap up. Yes, it's been a minute. The month of March was extremely hectic. I had a lot of work on, but not only that, I had a lot of pretty much required reading, I guess you could call it, because I had buddy reads and I had my book club reads and I had podcast reading. So March was very busy. I read a lot of pages in the month of March. So let's get started so this won't be too long. So the first book that I read was this one right here, which is Emma by Jane Austen. Now, this book was really a thorn in my side, frankly speaking. This was one of the books that I had to read for my Normandy book club, and we were supposed to be reading a romance novel. This is what was picked for romance, but this is not a romance, which I knew that when it was picked, and I just kept thinking, Lord Jesus, this is not romance. But anyway, so we read Emma, which Emma has been on my list of classics to read, and so I was excited to read it. But of course, when I started reading it, I realized it was not for me. All I can say is, Emma, mind your business, okay? 'Cause Lord Jesus, the most irritating character I think I've read about in a long time. Super irritating. I didn't like anything about this book. It's a lot of chatter and conversations here and there about other people, about apples, about absolutely nothing important that you would even care about. Just chatter, 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 chatter. This is supposed to be the highlight of reading Jane Austen novels, is the fact that the conversation is supposed to be, it's supposed to give us an insight on life at the time. I just found it to be fucking boring, and I would much rather read a Bronte novel than this. So that's it. I think I gave this one 2 stars. Okay, the next book that I read was this one right here, which is Jitterbug Perfume by Tom Robbins. Now, this was essentially a reread for me. I was reading this for the podcast. So for the podcast, we're going to discuss this season 3 of Brown Girls Booking. I absolutely love this novel. I think it's really, really intelligent and really well done. It's very hard to explain without giving too much away, but I'll read what it says on the back. It says, Jitterbug Perfume is an epic, which is to say it begins in the forest of ancient Bohemia and doesn't conclude until 9 o'clock tonight, Paris time. It is a saga as well. A saga must have a hero, and the hero of this one is a janitor with a missing bottle. The bottle is blue, very, very old, and embossed with the image of a goat-horned god. If the liquid in the bottle actually is the secret essence of the universe, as some folks seem to think, it had better be discovered soon because it is leaking and there is only a drop or 2 left. So this book is not a very long book, but it is a very interesting book with a lot of humor, and it talks a lot about this idea of immortality, and all of this brought in with a theme or storyline around a perfume, a special perfume. It takes place in 3 different cities, Seattle, New Orleans, and Paris. And the characters are all pretty eclectic. And if you haven't read Tom Robbins, I feel like this is a good place to start. He's someone who writes stories which seem to be a little off the wall and crazy, but at the same time, he's saying a lot about different various themes. I highly recommend it. It's a real good read. I had a great discussion about this book with Christy, so I hope you'll catch it, season 3 of the podcast. So I gave this one 4.5 stars. Okay, the next book on my list was this one right here, which is L'Oeuvre by Émile Zola. And this is book 14, if I'm not mistaken, of the Hugon Macau series, which I'm reading with my friend Anna. We've been reading through this 20-book series, and this is called The Masterpiece in English. This is a story that focuses on Claude Lantier, which is one of the 2 sons of Gervaise, which we see in L'Assommoir. which we read back, I think it's book 8 or something like that. But this book explores the idea of what it is to be a passionate artist. It gives us a little tiny look into the world of a painter, artist in 19th century France and in Paris. And not only that, but we then plunge fully into the mind of someone who is so passionate about art that Claude has this idea of a painting in his mind that he doesn't seem to be able to put onto canvas in the perfect way that he's imagining it. So he is trying to create the perfect masterpiece. This is a very intense book, very emotional, sad, difficult to stay focused on at times because it is a little bit of a slow burn book. But not only that, it touches on subject matter in almost like the crazy of being a passionate artist and how it can drive someone to do some of the most inhumane things. It was a good book, but I didn't think it was one of his best. I think I gave this one a 3.5. And I think it's because I wanted more around the workings of the art world and a little less crazy. That's just me, just a little less crazy. So I gave this one, 3.5 stars. But the writing is so beautiful in the beginning, especially when he describes some of the paintings of the time period. Oh, fantastic. So yeah, love them. Okay, then the next book I read was this one right here, which is Perfect Peace by Dr. Daniel Black. This was the book club read for March for the Read So Lit book club that I run on Patreon. This book, oh my God, just freaking blew my mind. This was my favorite book of last month. I gave this book 5 fucking stars. So I'm going to read you a little bit of the back to kind of give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about in this book. When the 7th child of the Peace family, named Perfect, turns 8, her mother, Emma Jean, tells her bewildered daughter, "You was born a boy. I made you a girl, but that ain't what you supposed to be. So from now on, you gonna be a boy. It'll be strange at first, but you'll get used to it. And this'll be over after a while." From this point forward, Perfect's life becomes a bizarre kaleidoscope of events. Meanwhile, the Peace family is forced to question everything they thought they knew about gender, sexuality, unconditional love, and fulfillment. This book is so damn good, and it's because Dr. Black manages to talk about gender in such a specific way. This book is from 2010, so it's a backlist, but he seemed to have his finger on the pulse, talking about gender. Now, this book isn't only about that. I would say it's about also how people react to the family and to Perfect once everybody realizes that his gender has been masked, so that he is not a girl, he is actually a boy. And once that happens, we have the repercussions that comes out of that for the Peace family, for Perfect, but not only that, for the church people and the other people in the community. It's a very well written book with a lot of symbolism, a lot of characters that are very well written, a very intelligent conversation. It's a really good book, and I highly recommend it as a book to read if you're in a book club. Because if you're in a book club and you're having, you want to have like a good discussion with a book that's going to bring up a lot of talk, this is the one. Now, the thing about this book club last month that was so great was we had Dr. Daniel Black come to the book club, and he was fucking fantastic. We had such a wonderful discussion with him, and I hope to have him back. so that we can discuss one of his other books. So since I've read this one, I now own practically all of Dr. Daniel Black's books. The only one I don't own is his newly released one, which just came out, I think, this year. And it's a nonfiction, and I will be purchasing that one as well. And I'll be getting to, hopefully, his first book this month. So yeah, 5 stars. Okay, the next book on my list that I read was this beast right here. And this is The Bonfire of the Vanities by Tom Wolfe. This is the book that we chose for the podcast for the 1980s. And Tom Wolfe's The Bonfire of the Vanities is a book that was very popular in the 80s. And so we chose to read this one. But my God, I did not love this book. And it really has a lot to do with the way that Tom Wolfe decides to paint the different characters that he develops. So he develops characters that come from the Black community, so-called based on real people, Reverend Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, and then making them look like buffoons in the book. But not only that, even when he tries to paint the portrait of the main character, Sherman, who's supposed to be this white, wealthy finance man, he even paints his character and all of the other white people and the other Jewish people that are in the book, very flat, one-dimensional characters. And for all the things that he's trying to say with the book and how he's trying to paint sort of like a kaleidoscope of New York, which I think even that seems flat. New York is a very bold, vibrant city, and he paints it as just sort of one-dimensional. Over here, it's poor. Over there, it's rich. And it doesn't have any depth to that description of the town, as well as the characters being very one-dimensional. And just the storyline itself, which is about a white man who feels like he is the master of the universe because he has everything at his fingertips. He's married, he has a child, he lives in a huge penthouse apartment. He has all of this money that he's making because he's a very successful finance man. He's even got a lover that he sees regularly, despite his wife actually kind of knowing about her. And then one night he's picked up his lover and they're driving, I think, back to Manhattan, and he takes a wrong turn and he winds up in the middle of a Black neighborhood in the Bronx. And that's when I started getting a really piss poor feeling about this book, is when I was reading that section, because the way he was describing the Bronx and the way he was describing these Black people, and then the incident that happens is out of fear of Black people. And so I'm not going to say what happens in case you really want to read the book. So once this incident happens, things change for Sherman, and he no longer is feeling like he's a master of the universe anymore, because his fate is in the hands of plenty of other people. But anyway, there's a lot of other things that happen in the book. I feel like Tom Wolfe is discussing this from a point of view, in the sense where he's only looking at it from the white man's point of view, which is Sherman. It's New York, and it's the 1980s, and 1980s New York was not a safe space for anybody in any shape or form. And I feel like the only thing that he does paint correctly is this idea that money is an essence. And 1980s New York, it's money, 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 and everybody needs to make more of it. Nobody has enough of it. Everybody's worried about it. And if you don't have it, you have to look like you have it. Pretty much. That part he has painted, pretty much okay. But the rest, I was just like, I don't care. Anyway, if you really want to know more about what we think, then like I said, catch the podcast, season 3, and you'll hear what we think in detail about this book right here. I gave this book 2 stars. Then the next book I read was this one right here, which is called 5 Smooth Stones. And this is by a white author who's called Anne Fairbairn. This book was published in 1966. And this is a story that follows a character called David. And it starts in New Orleans, Louisiana. You see how David is rescued from his birth situation, and he's rescued by his grandparents. And so they decide to take him and raise him. He's being raised with all of the values that his grandparents have about life, about race, about interactions with white people, and et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, the story goes on, and he grows up, and we basically follow David once he goes off to college, and he's accepted into this predominantly white college. He's one of the few Black Americans who are accepted in this predominantly white college, which is up north. And from there, we go through a whole host of different things and subjects, a big portion of the civil rights movement. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, this book was 854 pages or something like that. Some ridiculous amount of pages. I would say, honestly, this book should have not been more than 400 pages, in my opinion. Maybe 350, between 350 and 400 pages. So for me, I would say don't bother to read this book because it is way, way too long. But not only that, it has a love relationship that is developed in the story between David, a young Black man, and a young white woman. And they meet at this predominantly white college. Now, the problem for me was, and I was buddy reading this with my friend Rosa, and Rosa and I had both the same problems, was this relationship that the author was writing into the book did not make sense. It did not feel like these two characters were really in love. She did not know how to make it so that as the reader, I would believe that these two were in love with each other. I didn't believe it 1 second. It came off cringy and really weird. But I know what she was trying to do. She was trying to put an interracial relationship in the book because of the time period that it's happening at. It didn't work for me. And I can tell you the only time I was happy was when that character, Sarah, was not on the pages. Because every time she was on the pages, I was just like, oh, Jesus, make this go fast. Make this go fast. In the beginning of the book, I think is what I like the most about the book. And that's just because she seemed to have a good idea of what it is, relationships between Blacks and whites in the South, in the 60s, in the 50s, in the 40s. She seemed to really have a real handle on that. And so her writing was very spot on in the beginning of the book. But as it goes on, there are more and more new characters that are added to the story. So, I mean, I counted maybe 30 to 35 different characters in the book. I stopped counting when I got midway through because I was just like, I really can't be bothered, because she will introduce a character as, let's say, for instance, she'll introduce a character as Mary Johnson or Mary Louise Johnson and have her full name there. And then you only see her for 2 pages and then you don't see her again. So I'm like, well, then why do I need to know her name is Mary Louise Johnson? You know, like, yeah. So not only that, though, each character somehow seemed to be a bit exaggerated in description. That is, in the way they speak and in their purpose in the story always seemed to be a bit too much, over the top. And as you read along, that's what gave me this effect of, okay, this is interesting. Oh, no, it's not interesting. It's not interesting. Not sure. Oh, okay, it's more interesting now. Oh, no, it's not interesting. So I kept doing this. And so that's why, in the end, I can say this book was probably should not been more than 350 pages to 400 pages. It just did not come off the way I expected it to come off. Now, I feel like the whole section around the civil rights movement, I saw she was trying to do something with that, and she did introduce this one particular character that I thought could have been really interesting, but she was so over the top that it just did not work for me. And so that's part of the problem with this kind of thing is introduce characters, yes, try to make them authentic and more than just, one-dimensional, but also don't have your characters doing these outlandish, over-the-top things or saying these outlandish, over-the-top things, especially when they're only on the page for they're only in the book for 2 pages. It's just, no, it just doesn't work. But, for this size, I would say don't even bother with this book. Just don't even bother. Don't bother. No. Okay, so last but not least, I read the last couple of days of the month of March. I read The Dry, and that's by Jane Harper. And this is the first book in the series. It's a detective series. I can't remember the guy's name, Aaron something or other series. And this is a story which begins with a gruesome murder of a couple and their son. And the only person left living after this horrible murder is a baby of 5-6 months old. Is the only one that's left alive after this terrible attack. And so the main character, Aaron, he comes back to the town because this whole book takes place in Australia, and I think it's supposed to be Western Australia. That was really good because I listened to this one on audio and I just thought it was done really, really well. Listening to the accents and everything was really nice. So when he comes to town, now, what you need to know is Aaron is a police officer, but in Melbourne, so on the east coast of Australia. But when he goes back to his town, because of the death of his best friend, who is the man who was murdered, of the couple, he goes back because of that. And when he goes back, it's like it opens up this Pandora's box and everybody is hating on him. We're hearing how people are angry with him for coming back. They keep telling him, oh, you should have just stayed where you were back in Melbourne. We don't need you here, kind of thing. And from there, we learn about a lot of the other people living in this town. And at the same time, there's this devastating, crippling drought, which is making life really hard for the farmers in the area because everything is just dead and people don't have money and they're on the verge of losing their businesses. But at the same time, Aaron is still trying to figure out who killed his friend, wife, and son and why. It's very well done. It's not perfect, but because there's some issues about communication problems between Aaron and his father. But other than that, I feel like it's still a pretty interesting story. And it's one that obviously will develop into an interesting part 2, because I think there are already 3 or 4 books from this series out already. But yeah, I highly recommend if you want something that is, a thriller, mystery. I highly recommend listening to it like I did. I found it, pretty nice because I could actually listen to it while I was doing some cleaning and things like that. And it was perfectly fine. And the accents are spot on. So good. So that one, I think I gave it 3.5 stars. And that was the last book that I read from the month of March. So that makes 7 books that I read the month of March, which pretty good. But it's just that some of the books were super long. That meant I read a lot of pages. I'll put it here, how many pages I read last month. But I mean, man, I read so many pages that this first week of April, I have not read very much because I've just been so knackered from everything that I read last month, especially since the majority of the things that I read were not 4 and 5 stars. there's only 2 books that I really loved last month, and that's Perfect Peace, which was 5 stars, and Jitterbug Perfume, which was 4.5. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this wrap up. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what you thought of any of them, and would you read any of them or not? So I will be back with another video very soon. Bye-bye.